Hello. So now that we have a second screen and we set it up, we want to copy the color to the new screen and use it on the new screen. Here in this iteration, just to demonstrate that we copied it successfully, we will color the background of the new screen with the color that was selected. And if you're following this for the class project, this will be the end of the required part of the project. Iteration 8, the using the color to paint on the new screen is extra credit or additional optional work. So to how do we copy the color to the new screen? Let's start with the process. So problem formulation, the scope. What is the scope? I have a color object on the first screen that I want to copy to the second screen and use it to color the background of the second view. I'm only using it to color the background of the second view to demonstrate that I actually copied it successfully. How do we test this? We select a color in the first screen, know exactly what it is, move on to the second screen, navigate to the second screen, and see that the background color changed with that. In the testing, I just want to you to observe something, that in the first screen I have the color displayed in a view that sits on top of another view. So when alpha is 0, the background is white, so you see a white. In the second screen, I'm just gonna color the layer, the view layer that's there, which sits on top of nothing. So if alpha is 0, the second screen will display nothing. So we're gonna try to test this only with alpha 1. So solution formulation, model view controller. So in the model, we need to think of a way to copy the file. Think about it this way: you have two screens, one that has color, another that doesn't. So the first thing to copy the value of the color is in the second screen. You need to add has its own color object. So I need to add a color object on the second screen, so that when I copy the color from the first screen, it goes on to the color object that I have in the second screen. Notice that each screen has its own controller, and thus each one has its own memory, and each one has its own scope. So I want you, and this could be an area of possible confusion to many of you, but if you think that you have two boxes and you have a book in one box and you want to move that book to the second box, that's basically what we're trying to do here, except in digital I can actually make a copy of it and move a copy without losing it from the first box. So the view, nothing of what we're going to do will affect the view, because all what we're doing is behind the scene. We want to make a memory object, or an object in the memory managed by the second screen, able to access an object that is in memory managed by the first screen. Each screen manages their own areas of the memory. Each one has their own scope. So theoretically, each one is completely independent. So I have something in one, and I want the second to have access to it. So there will be work that I have to do in each one of them. In the second controller, in the second screen, I have to create a memory for a color object. And then I can use that to color the background when the view loads. So I'm going to take the viewDidLoad event of the second controller, and I will use the color to color. In the first screen, when the color is created, and before the navigation from the first screen to the second, before the navigation takes place, I need to copy the data to the second screen. Now, the navigation takes place through the segue, the push segue that we created, the instance of the UI storyboard segue. So I will use that instance in order to get access between the two screens. Think about the segue as a bridge between the two screens. So through that bridge I can, or a pipe, and I can push the value of the color through that pipe from the first screen to the second screen. So the controller, in the first controller, we will override the prepare for segue function so that I can mark the transit. Prepare for segue is a built-in function that responds to the event when the transition segue is about to launch. So it hasn't launched yet, but it is ready to launch. So that timing, before the operating system executes the segue, it notifies the prepare for segue function, and that function is part of the UI view controller class. And through that function, we'll assign the color object from the first screen to the color object that we're going to create on the second screen. On the second screen, I need to create that color object, and then I will use view.load just for demonstration purposes to color the background of the view. So how am I going to implement this? You can go in the order any way you can. In the second view, I want to add the instance. So actually, looking at this, I want to modify this a little bit. I want to start with the second controller first, and I want to add the instance of the UI controller here first. So the instance of UI controller color class as a variable with the class scope in the second controller first. Why? Because when I go back to the first controller, I want to assign the color to the color property of the second controller. So before, I want to create it first, so when I get to the first and try to assign it, I can see it. Then go back to the second controller in the view.load function and just assign that color to the background so we can see that it changed. And this actually is, as I mentioned before, is the required part of the project if you're doing this for the project. And that concludes iteration number 7 and the iteration before last. Our next iteration will be, instead of using the color to paint the background, we'll use it to paint on the screen, like use it, the finger to touch and draw images and pictures and stuff like that. That second part, iteration 8, is optional, by the way. So if that's where you want, you don't have to continue moving to the second iteration.